Alright guys, welcome back. This is going to be our third and final video on communism in China. And our last video we talked about Mao's Great Leap Forward and what a giant failure and devastating tragedy it was for China. And this brings us to our last big topic with China, and that's something called the Cultural Revolution, also a result of Mao Zedong. So let's get into the details here, and let's think about the Great Leap Forward and its devastating impact on China. Millions of deaths, just an upending of social order and so forth. What effect would that have on Mao's ability to lead China? Well, I think we can all figure this out, that going forward, Mao realizes he's kind of pushed too far. He's trying to do too much too quickly, and with the failure of the Great Leap Forward and the sort of messy divorce, if you will, with the Soviet Union, Mao believes he might need to take kind of a back seat on the role of the government. So he goes into almost like a semi-retirement phase, and with him basically kind of behind the scenes now, other leaders come to the fore, and what they do is they start to change a lot of Mao's policies. They begin to kind of loosen up some of Mao's strict communist ideas, replacing with hints of capitalism. Farmers, for example, can start selling their goods for a profit now, as opposed to having to basically just work for the benefit of the government. And this was something that Mao, of course, did not like. He's sitting in the background just stewing, absolutely looking upset, but feeling he can't do much about it. By the way, if you're thinking about the Great Leap Forward and what impact it has on China, just look at the birth rate of China, for example. The birth rate up here, the birth rate, death rate of China. Notice how during the Great Leap Forward, there's a drop in birth rate and a spike in the death rate. So this really does tell us why Mao has to kind of go basically into retirement. Now, Mao's vision was to create this perfectly equal society in China. And that's the goal of all communists, right? Everyone's going to be exactly the same, total equality, all that stuff. And he felt that these new policies that had been put into place by his successors were weakening that vision. So he decides he's got to re-enter the political arena and revive the revolution he feels that is basically in danger of dying. He sees the revolution as almost like a candle that's beginning to kind of flicker and almost go out. He's got to get it going again. And so he does this in a very, he re-enters politics in a splash, if you will. And I mean that quite literally. In 1966, he does this little publicity stunt where he swims across the Yangtze River. He swims in it. I don't think he actually swam all the way across. But the point is, he's showing that even at 72, he's young and vigorous and healthy enough to lead China once again. So if Mao wants to get his revolution going again, he wants to jumpstart the communist revolution, he's got to have some people kind of behind him. He's got to have some revolutionaries at his disposal. So he's thinking, okay, who should I target to revive my revolution? Is he going to target older Chinese people, or is he going to target middle-aged Chinese people, or is he going to target the young people of China? And if you're thinking about energy and people who are more easily manipulated, the young is where you go. So in 1966, Mao starts to urge the young people of China to learn a revolution by making revolution. In other words, help me continue the communist revolution in China. And so millions of Chinese youngsters respond to this by basically dropping out of school and forming these militia units known as the Red Guards. The Red Guards. These will be Mao's, metaphorical soldiers in this revolution. And you can see our Red Guardsmen surrounding Mao, looking very serious, very militant, very brainwashed. And if you'll notice, they're almost all holding this little red book. In fact, that's what we refer to it as the little red book. And what it was a book full of quotes from Mao himself. And I thought I'd share just two quotes of Mao that I think give you some insight into his beliefs. First quote at the top says, "Every communist must grasp the truth. Political power grows out of the barrel of a gun." A second quote from Mao, "A revolution is not a dinner party or writing an essay or painting a picture or doing embroidery. A revolution is an insurrection, an act of violence by which one class overthrows another." So the goal of the Cultural Revolution is to basically create this pure, equal society where everyone in China will be basically a worker and a peasant with no one with privileges. Now, standing in his way, Mao feels, are people we would refer to as intellectuals. So intellectuals, think of like a teacher, a professor, someone who uses their mind, not necessarily their hands. Mao saw these people as both useless and dangerous. Useless because they're not out in the fields working, but dangerous because these are people with good educations and they can see through a lot of Mao's garbage, and he sees them as people who have to be kind of pushed aside. So anyone with any type of authority or special privileges were targeted during this Cultural Revolution. And what would typically happen is these Red Guards would arrest. Now, when I say arrest, they have no actual political authority or legal authority. They're just basically, it's a mob that grabs you and puts you under arrest. And what they will do is often put you on these trials where you're publicly humiliated. You could be physically punished, beaten, that sort of thing, imprisoned, and in some cases even taken out and basically executed. So this is kind of like mob justice running wild, and there's no real authority other than Mao that's guiding this. He's created this storm of young revolutionaries who are fearless and believe they're doing the right thing by ridding China of people that they've been told are enemies of the state. These are the people they've been told that are keeping China unequal, and they have to be punished. So let's think about the economy of China. You've got this chaos ensuing in China. Everyone is paranoid and afraid. You're probably not going to want to go to work. You're probably not going to want to go down to the store. It's going to have a real problem, a real effect rather, on the communist economy. Farm production, material production in the factories, they begin to decline rapidly. Things are getting so bad that a civil war might even be possible, that the last little strands of political control and societal control, they might come undone. And in the end, estimates for the Cultural Revolution ranged wildly from maybe 500,000 deaths up to the millions of deaths. It's one of those things where we probably will never know the exact number, but the point is it was incredibly bloody and just brutal. By 1968, Mao himself has come to the realization that this Cultural Revolution thing has gotten out of control, that the young people and the Red Guardsmen and other people, opportunists and all this, are really just on the verge of ripping the country to pieces. And so Mao orders the army to disband the Red Guards, and that's kind of the end. Now, before we talk about America in China for a second, can you imagine being one of these young Red Guardsmen? You've been out doing things that are frankly terrible, oftentimes. You've been doing things you never thought you would be doing, but you were doing things you thought were right. You thought you were doing the right thing by following Mao's commands, and then all of a sudden you're told, well, no, that's not right. Go back home. Like, how do you transition back to being a normal person after this? I have no idea. All right, quickly we're going to look at the relationship with the United States and Mao's China, and how our relationship begins to improve in the 1970s. As we looked at in the very first video, for years we as a country, by we I mean the United States, ignored communist China and recognized little Taiwan as the real China. And that was kind of the standoff. This was part of the Cold War. We and China didn't have a very good relationship. And then out of the blue, in April 1971, the United States table tennis team, who was in Asia at the time, I think they were in Japan if my memory serves me well, received an invitation to come to communist China and play a match. Now, this is a huge deal because these will be the first Americans on communist Chinese soil since the 1940s. So for the better part of 2 decades, China was basically just a giant mystery to us. And now Americans are going there. And this is the beginning of something we refer to as ping-pong diplomacy, right? Table tennis, ping-pong diplomacy. There's Richard Nixon, there's Mao Zedong. And in 1971, with our relationship with China beginning to, get a little more friendly, we support the People's Republic of China, that's Communist China's efforts to gain a seat at the UN, because Communist China was not a member of the UN because the UN recognized Taiwan as the real China. Well, things are going to reverse. Taiwan is basically kicked out of the UN, and the People's Republic gets their seat. Now, why are we getting so friendly with Communist China all of a sudden is the big question. And the reality is Nixon wanted to exploit that rift that was developing between the Soviet Union and China. He wants to break that rift open to make sure those two countries are not teaming up against us, the United States. In 1972, Nixon does something dramatic. He goes to China. There was a phrase that only Nixon could go to China. And what that meant was Nixon had made his political career in the 1950s and 40s as being this red hunter, as this guy who's going out and basically, rooting out communists and punishing. He'd always had a very tough line on communists. So for him to go to China and tour the Great Wall and meet with Chinese dignitaries and shake hands with Mao, it was a real sign that things had changed between us and the communist Chinese government. And this still affects you to the present day. We're so used to things made in China. That's where it starts. Because with that thawing of tension between us and the Chinese comes an opportunity for American businesses to start doing work in China, and Chinese factories begin selling stuff to us. The last thing in this video, guys, so let's look at Mao's legacy. So Mao dies in 1976 of a heart attack. So just like Joseph Stalin, he never faced any type of justice for the many, many, many crimes that he committed. And the thing about Mao's legacy, it's kind of like Stalin's legacy. It's a very confused one in that on one hand, he turned China into a world superpower, a country that had nuclear weapons, a country that had a massive military, a country that was a world power, right? They'd gone from a kind of a backwards, confused society to a world power. But the cost was tremendous. We don't know how many people died under Mao's leadership, but we estimate it's in the tens of millions. It could be 40 million, it could be 70 million. We don't know. But we do know his death toll is much higher than even Stalin or Hitler's. Mao is probably responsible for more death than any other person in modern history, and perhaps maybe most of human history. This guy really killed a lot of people. And there is Mao on display. So just like Lenin, Mao is on permanent display, and to show the future generations of Chinese their founder. So that's our final video, guys, on Communist China. We've gone all the way from Mao winning the Chinese Civil War in the 1940s to the Great Leap Forward, which was a huge setback for China, to the Cultural Revolution, which was also a bit of a failure, to a normalizing between America and Communist China, to Mao's legacy. And that is our study of communism in China.